So this is the chapter, we're talking about the study of Torah, study, so to speak, interaction with Torah. And he said that there is a highest divine energy in the world, which means it's a creature, it's a creation by God, and it is related to the Torah in such a way that a person who interacts with the Torah can access that energy, but it's only related externally and secondarily. It's attached to, like with a string, and which means that it's not guaranteed that if you interact with Torah you'll get it. And he said there are two different conditions that are necessary so that your interaction with Torah will enable you to access that energy. One is awe and fear of God when actually learning the Torah, and the other is a certain level of performance of Jewish laws and directives for the rest of the life, life in general. Without those two preconditions, the interaction with Torah will not produce an interact with a higher energy, and that means, so far as this is concerned, we'll see an exception in a moment, in a few minutes, but as far as this is concerned, the study of Torah will be like the study of any other subject, like reading a letter or studying chemistry. I have no holiness whatsoever. Again, he's going to talk about an exception to this in a little while, but that's what he's saying here in paragraph 5. So now, the reasoning behind the awe and the fear is because you have to know what you're dealing with, what you're operating with. I gave an analogy last time, but maybe I would give you a different analogy this time. Let's suppose you have a very wise, knowledgeable, well-informed, and well-intentioned person, and you're given 5 minutes of his time. You'll ask him questions, and assuming that he feels disposed to do so, he'll answer your questions. What would you ask? So here I give you what's supposed to be a joke. There was a king who had a prime minister, and he said, "You've been such a faithful servant, I give you the opportunity to ask for 3 requests." So he says, well, number 1, I would like a castle on the sea. The king says, done. And number 2, he says, I would like the month of August off. He says, done. And number 3, says the prime minister, I would like you to please grant my first 2 requests. I don't think everybody will be happy. This is how you use up your 3 requests from the king? One of them's just redundant to the other 2? That's a colossally stupid and insulting thing to do. Now, would you, you have these 5 minutes with this overwhelmingly wise person, would you ask him, do you remember what my best present was that I got from my mitzvah 22 years ago? I don't think you would do that. Why would you waste your time to do that? And if you did it, it would be an insult. So a person who is going to interact with the Torah, which is really attached to this highest divine energy in a mood of triviality and a lack of fear and awe, is a person whose interaction bespeaks either gross ignorance as to what it is he's interacting with, or a lack of normal human value that he should interact with it in a way that's appropriate. And that being the case, he will not have the privilege of accessing that highest energy in terms of his interaction with it. I think here the musar in it, the values in it are pretty close to the surface. It requires an appreciation for what you're doing in order to be able to have the effect that is desired here. So that's one level. Then he says also that there should be a certain level of performance of the Torah's mitzvos, and he's very careful here not to talk about perfection. When we talk about perfection, number 1, nobody will be left. We have a verse in Koheles, Ein oram tzadik ba'oretz sheyasav le'echta. There's no person righteous in the land who will do good and not fail. And yes, the word Adam is there, although when many people quote the pasuk, they leave it out, but it is there. Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz, She'as Tov Lo Yichta, will do good and not fail. So you're not talking about perfection. So there's obviously a sliding scale here, and it's very hard to draw a line. But it means that your performance is a precondition for your interaction with Torah to have this effect. It can't be to a person whose attitude in general towards the Torah is cavalier. That's the way I would put it. The first was that your attitude towards, I said it, no, I'm sorry, I used ambiguous words. The first is that your attitude towards the study of Torah or the interaction with the Torah material should not be cavalier. And the other is that the attitude towards the responsibilities of living a Torah life shouldn't be cavalier. It's a matter of the cavalierness of the attitude, I believe. And that's especially true because of what those who've been with me from the beginning, we said several times, that reward and punishment in this sefer are dependent only upon your effort, not upon your accomplishment. So the only failure you could possibly have is a failure of not making an effort. If you're in a situation where with maximum effort you could only do 30% of the mitzvos, for you 30% will beat success. And if you do 28%, I'm just making the numbers up, then that'll be good enough so that when you interact with Torah, it should have this effect. So it's not a question of success. And the reason why he stresses effort rather than success, the deepest reason is because your success doesn't belong to you. You don't create the success. You do the effort. Because Baruch Hu causes the reaction to your effort, whether it'll be success that you looked for by making the effort, or it'll be some other kind of result. But it's not your doing. You don't have that control. So that being the case, how could you get more merit for the success? That's been given to you as a gift. So here, the performance of mitzvos will be limited by your capabilities, and if you live up to a reasonable percentage of that, then I believe that's what he means. You will be credited with the success of interacting with that highest energy. Now, he doesn't anywhere say, someone asked me this last time, or maybe he asked me after the shir, I don't remember. It doesn't, in this sefer, talk about what the nature of this energy is and how it's different from other energies. But I think we'll have some insight into that when he talks about how one should carry out in practice the interaction with Torah, what one should study and how one should study it, and all the rest. Now he says, I told you that without these two preconditions, then there would be no access to that energy. But it doesn't mean it's zero. It doesn't mean it's zero. Now I'm going to translate for you the words that he says here. Even so, our sages have revealed to us a great secret. He didn't talk about creating that energy as a secret. He didn't talk about connecting that energy to the Torah as a secret. No, I explained it to you, and there it is. But no, in addition, that's a great secret. And they put it this way, that if the wicked would not have abandoned this interaction with Torah, I keep calling it interaction because Talmud Torah, as we saw, includes reading the words without understanding them. Okay. If the wicked, that means people whose actions are bad, and whose intentions are bad, whose priorities and values are bad, if they had not abandoned interacting with the Torah, it would have, in the end, brought them back to good. Meaning, even though they do not have in their power to bring down that highest energy that we mentioned before, still, in spite of that, the words of Torah in and of themselves are holy, and their holiness is permanent, fixed in them, mitzad atzmam, from their very nature, not attached to it externally, as I stressed now 10 times. But from the very nature, they have a certain holiness in them. To the extent that a person who occupies himself with them regularly, masmid could mean regularly or continuously, then time after time, there will be a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of awakening. Like the smallest possible flicker each time. But if he occupies himself with it, in the end, that light, that growing light, will grow to the point where it will take control, and it will bring him back to the good. And this is what the sages said, Halavai osi ozvu v'sorosis shamaru. Now, you have to know how to read the words of Chazal. Literally that means, oh, I wish people would abandon me and keep the Torah. No, God is not wishing that people would abandon him. Meaning that if they go that far, at least they would have some connections to the Torah. That the light that is in it will bring them back to the good. So, I've taught this many times, but I didn't notice, because I wasn't paying attention, exactly what he says. He doesn't say casual interaction. He says continuous interaction. So this is going to exclude a lot of people who don't qualify as successful Jews, and who do interact with the Torah, and it doesn't bring them back to the good, because there's no hasmada there. There's no continuous interaction with it. Now he says, even this is dependent upon a condition. It's obvious, he says, that these words are not written about someone who occupies himself with it for the sake of joking or making fun of, or to interpret it in such a way which is against halacha, which means here the right way of interpreting it. Halacha here doesn't mean practical law. It means the right way of interpreting it. And there are conditions for that. But rather he occupies himself with at least the way he would occupy himself with other wisdoms. As a person learning chemistry, he's learning chemistry to understand it. He's not learning chemistry to make fun of it. He's not learning chemistry to find a clever misinterpretation that he can use to put other people down. Right? He wants to know what it really means. If he doesn't satisfy that condition, then he's completely removed from anything that the Torah could give him. Now, I'll answer your question in a second. So now we really have two different levels here, and the levels, to be fully understood, which I don't think I can do for you, but I can at least shed some light. The levels have to be distinguished, and you have to see how to relate them. The first level is the Torah with the highest energy, to which is attached by a rope. And there are conditions for getting that higher energy, and they are awe and fear of God while you're actually learning Torah, interacting with Torah, and your general level of performance. Then there's the Torah with its own inherent, intrinsic holiness, which can have an effect on you even when you don't fulfill the conditions. You don't interact with it with awe and fear of God, and for the Torah itself, and you don't interact with it at a level of performance. The level of performance can be very poor. Still, the light in it can affect you, as long as you're honest, as long as you study it honestly. Now, I want you to know, this is a footnote of a real incident that happened, and this is not a joke. These conditions are not a joke. When I first came here 41 years ago, a friend of mine was dealing with a woman who was here as a student at HUC. HUC is Hebrew Union College, which is the place where they train Reform rabbis. And she reported to my friend that in their studies, Talmud is optional. There's no reason for a Reform rabbi to learn Talmud at all, ever. But she signed up for a course. And the professor, said to her on the first day, to the class, I have chosen Tractate Sukkah because Tractate Sukkah shows clearly just how foolish the Talmud is.
Oh my.
That's what he said on the first day. And I can guarantee you with 3 50-minute meetings per week for 14 weeks, you could do it. I could do it with physics. So you could do it for sure. And it's the blind leading the blind, deaf and dumb. So it's not a joke that there are people who learn it with that kind of thing in mind. And the other is Emmanuel Levinas. I don't know if he's still alive. He was a French Jewish philosopher. And he wrote a book which someone recommended to me, something like 9 Talmudic readings or something like that. So I picked it up. Now he's a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. And it was very clear that he was cherry-picking the Talmud to find nuggets that he could say supported his socialism. There wasn't a hint of, what can I learn from this literature? In what way can this literature improve me or change me? What new insights or new values could I learn from it? There was nothing of that. Zero. He wasn't learning anything from it. He was using it as a tool to support his already established philosophy, which wasn't brought into question at all. So I said to the person who recommended it, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, if at anything, I would like to see someone who at least came with an open mind to learn something and be affected by it, not looking at it just for a tool. So that's here. So now the question is, how does the Ma'or Sheba, the light that's in it intrinsically, affect someone who has no interest whatsoever in being affected, treats it with no respect, respect for its divine qualities whatsoever? Yeah, he's an honest person. He's an honest person. But it has not how does it have an effect? Where does the effect come from? And I think that's at least part of what the Rabbi means when he says, our rabbis have revealed to us this great secret. Because on the surface, there's no reason for it to have the effect. At least with the highest energy, if you qualify for awe and fear of God and the Torah, and you qualify that in your obedience to the Torah, then there's some reason to think that yes, you should be qualified to pull down that highest energy. But here, where you're treating it like chemistry, why should anything holy have an effect on you at all? And I think, again, this is just headlines. I can't do the whole job. But I think the answer is that the effect that we're talking about here is an effect on the soul. And he already told us that the soul is something which we have very little consciousness of. The vast majority of the soul we're not conscious of at all. And he brought a proof from it because the Talmud says that on Shabbos you have a double portion of soul, and nobody experiences that. And he's telling me that there's a metaphysical connection between the holiness that's put in the Torah and the holiness of the soul, and that connection can be made even if there's no conscious desire for a connection or application of a connection. If you consciously disconnect to the point where you make fun of it or you try to misinterpret it for other purposes, then you can block that out as well. You can cut your soul off from it as well. But if you don't do that, so then it can possibly have that effect. Now, I'm going further, but you had a question?
So if somebody comes to Torah with the awe and the fear, is there a guarantee that he's going to have that effect?
I think so.
And, how would he know if he has the effect?
He wouldn't know. I said before, we haven't had any description of what that energy is. But when we come to the practical recommendations he gives for how one should learn, and I think we'll have a little bit something to say about it. There was some other question here? Okay, now I want to illustrate to you what I think the connection is by explaining something else to you that's in the Talmud, which I had to struggle with for a long time before I came to any understanding of it at all. The Gemara says, La'olam yasok adam b'Torah or b'Torah u'mitzvos, 2 different gears. Shalol l'shma, should be talking shalol l'shma b'al l'shma. A person should always occupy himself with Torah, which is one text, or Torah and mitzvos, not for their own sake, not in terms of their real value, not for the sake of serving God, no, for some personal reason. He should do that because from occupying himself with it, not for its own sake, you'll come to do it for its own sake. That's what it says. The Kochel Yitzchak, which is a commentary of Yisrael Salanter's writings, says, don't miss out the word la'olam. Meaning, if you think you can step over the shalol lishma and jump right into the lishma, forget it. You're not going to do it. It's not possible. Okay, now, I should give a definition. Lishma, the Rambam defines in the 10th chapter, Laws of Repentance, as me'ahavas ha'adon she'tziva kain, from the love of the master who commanded it. If you have heard the phraseology, the Shema means for its own sake, and that means to you, I do it because I want to do it, because I like it, because I'm happy with it, that's dead wrong. That's dead wrong. The Shema is because your love of the master who commanded it. It's a relationship with God. And if what you've heard maybe in the name of the Nefesh HaChaim, something to the contrary, it's not to the contrary. If you read everything that he wrote, it's definitely not to the. No one can disagree with this. This is, like Torah Misinai. Okay, so now I had two problems with this. First of all, when you do something for a selfish payoff, is there any reason to think that if you do it long enough and keep getting that selfish payoff, that eventually you'll outgrow it and then come to do it without the payoff? Why would you think that? He worked for IBM for 52 years and he retired and they cut his salary and next day he came into work because after doing it for 52 years for salary, now he's just like in the groove, He's going to keep coming. No, he won't. He'll go play golf. So why would you think that if you do it long enough, shalol lishma, and then you'll come to do it lishma? That was one problem that I had. Let me say the second problem, then I'll take it. And the second problem I had was, don't we know of people who did it and shalol lishma, and it never had any effect on them whatsoever? Professors of Talmud who occupied themselves with Talmud and they never came to study Talmud for its own sake. They did it as a professional pursuit for professional rewards, and they never graduated beyond that. So I had these two problems with this statement in Chazal. Yeah, you want to say?
I was going to say, for the first example, wasn't it the whole reason for Pavlov's dog experiment, that he wanted the dog to be trained to just come, for the bell, not for the food? He did it.
Yeah, the stimulus response model of training for animals, which isn't true. But we're not dogs. Right. I'll remind you. And that's why I gave the example of the guy working for IBM. Mm-hmm. And he came for the salary for 52 years, and after the next day he's not coming in. So we're not like dogs in that respect. Mm-hmm. We're not trained to ring the bell when they get a piece of fish and then ring the bell without it. No, absolutely not. Okay, so now the second question I got an answer to in Rav Dessler. I made a mistake with the answer. I'll skip the whole long thing. To whom are these words addressed? You should always occupy yourself with a mitzvah for some selfish benefit. Then you'll come to do it out of love of the master who said. Who are these words written for? They're not written for atheists. They're not written for these professors of Talmud who care nothing about the religion as a religion. They're written for people who believe and who are committed to the system and want to do things in the best possible way. So there's built in, this comes from Yisrael Salanter, but there's built in the following complexity. This person whom the words are telling, do it for a selfish reason, this person already wants to do it lishma. He already has some motivation to do it because of love of the master who commanded it. A person who believes that the creator of the universe, who created us out of love and out of loving kindness, told us to do it, he automatically has some motivation to do it for that reason. It's just that motivation may be very weak. And his other motivations may be stronger, and he may consistently make the wrong decision. Like the person who says, davening says 7:30, if I get up at 7 o'clock, I can make it, and he sets his alarm for 7, and then when the alarm goes off, he hits the snooze button, right? But why did he set the alarm? Because he wants to go. He wants to go. And why does he want to go? Because he knows that's the right thing to do. It's just that when the alarm goes off and he's tired, hits the snooze button and he misses it. So there's a built-in motivation to do it for the right reason. Now, what the words are telling you is, if the right motivation that you automatically have isn't enough, if you consistently make the wrong decision, notice I'm using the words of decision over and over again. I don't want to imply that there isn't free will here. But it's in your situation where you consistently make the wrong decision, add a selfish motivation to your good motivation so that the two of them together will be enable you to make the right decision. So you say, okay, I'm hitting the snooze button every time. I'm going to make a meeting with Ruvain that 10 minutes before davening, we're going to learn for 10 minutes. Good. So now I have to be there 7:20. So I set my alarm for 10 to 7, 10 to 6:50. How about that? Right? Okay, the alarm goes off at 6:50, and where's the snooze button? Oh, wait a minute. Ruvain's going to be there. Ruvain's going to be there. How am I going to face him if I don't show up? So grinding my teeth, why do I have to do this? I get out of bed, I drag myself out of bed, I go down to meet him. Now, quiz time. Why am I getting out of bed? No. Two reasons together. I said it 90 seconds ago. It's the two reasons together. It's my intrinsic desire to do what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants, plus the additional motivation of not being embarrassed by seeing Ruvain. The two of them together were getting me out of bed. That's where Chazal said you'll outgrow the need for the selfish motivation, and you'll come to do it for the pure motivation. That already lets off the professors of Talmud, who really are not looking forward to doing it for its own sake, for the sake of the love of the master who commanded it. They're not part of the system at all. That answers that question. Yeah.
It seems that way only because you're also exercising the correct motivation as well.
Of course.
So it eventually will get.
Of course. That's the point. That's the point. That's what that's what eliminates the counterexample from people like professors of Talmud who never come to the point of learning it out of love of the master who commanded, because they don't want to come to that point. That's the answer to that question. But the other question is still alive, and that's the question of if you do something for a private payoff, even partly for a private payoff, and the more you do it, seems to be, the more ingrained you'll become, the more used you'll become to getting the private payoff. Why should anyone believe that after a while you'll outgrow the need for the private payoff, the personal payoff, and do it only without the personal payoff? And I think there are examples of that. There are real examples of that. And since you're Jewish, and yes Hashem, you'll get married and have children, you will then put into a practice the 11th commandment, which is, thou shalt play a musical instrument. And you will teach your children musical. No, you can't make it in Jewish society. Okay, it's not Jewish society, but it's very widespread. Now, let's take the violin, which is one of the hardest instruments to play, maybe the hardest, right? How do you start a 5-year-old on the violin? You get him a quarter violin. They make miniature violins for this little tyke, right? And you put his little stubby fingers, on the strings, and he holds a bow, and he proceeds to make noise. For 2 years, it's noise. It's awful. It sounds terrible, scratchy and wobbling, and the notes are sliding up and down the strings. It's absolutely awful. And guess what? He knows it's awful also, because he listens to recorded music. And he knows that what he's making doesn't sound like that. How do you get him to do it? Well, you're a Jewish parent with a carrot and a stick, right? If you do it, I give you this reward. If you don't, I'm gonna deprive you of something, right? You do that with a carrot and a stick. Not forever. Not forever. There comes a point where the child will want to practice the instrument without the carrot, without the stick, because now he's making music. And making music is precious. It's precious. Get to the point where you love playing your instrument. I'm speaking as instrumentalist. You get to the point where you love playing your instrument. You don't need any incentives at all. All you need is, give me some free time so that I can do this. Because when you can make music interacts with the deepest part of the person in ways that are currently very poorly understood, if at all. People who suffer lack of muscle control what's called spastic condition, or they probably have a better name for it now, right? When you play dance music, they can dance without any spastic interruption. Nobody knows how they do it. If you do exercise, you know very well. If you listen to music, you have much more energy, much more endurance. There's no good explanation for that. Music touches something in the soul. So then, when it gets to the point that what you're doing touches something in the soul, then all of a sudden you don't need that external motivation. So I use this as an understanding. When it's a question of doing a mitzvah, and the motivation for the mitzvah is low, and you need a selfish motivation in order to build up enough so you'll consistently make the right decision, that's usually because you're clumsy in that mitzvah. You don't understand it well. You don't feel competent in doing it. You're struggling to get the details right, like prayer. Prayer is very difficult. To say the words, the Hebrew words, the way they say them. Yeah. If I would say the morning prayer, it would be from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Thank you very much. Okay, so you start with little pieces. But when you're feeling incompetent, feeling out of tune with it because you don't understand what you're doing, so then it's not going to have that effect. But when you get to the point where you have greater understanding and you can identify with what you're doing, and you feel that you're playing the music, when you're making music, then you don't need that external motivation anymore. That's a psychological model where it definitely does work. So I thought maybe that's what. Now, what am I saying now? I'm saying that the mitzvah awakens something in the soul, because the same creator that made the mitzvah created the soul. So he made them fit together hand in glove. It's only that if the glove, doesn't fit right, or you're not putting your hand in the right fingers of the glove, then it's not going to fit. But it's made to fit. That I know, I believe, from the Gemara. Maybe that could be used here as well. This is the secret, that the mitzvos of the Torah are made for the soul. Now, he's talking specifically about interacting with the information of Torah, the texts of Torah, the ideas of Torah. But here again, if he's telling me that the intrinsic holiness in the words of Torah can affect the soul of someone who still doesn't have the appropriate awe and fear of God, and who doesn't look at it as holy at all, and whose level of performance is very poor, but it can still interact with it. It's a similar idea that this can still have an effect on his soul, because there's a linkage of like to like, even though he's not aware of it. He's totally unconscious of it. As long as he doesn't cut himself off. And cutting himself off, as we said, is a question of making fun, or doing it in order to interpret it in such a way that that is mistaken. And you have no idea how widespread this stuff is. I just got an article now which I put on my blog. There's a standard archaeological objection to the Torah. This is taught and written in books and magazine articles and so on and so on. And the objection is that whereas the Torah teaches us that Joshua conquered the land of Israel, if you look archaeologically, you'll see that at the time when Joshua conquered it, and after his time, there were many places in Israel where there were no Jewish artifacts whatsoever, and the growth of Jewish art was very slow, and it was a very gradual process. So archaeology does not bear out the biblical description. Well, if you actually take out the book of Joshua and read it, now this is a radical idea, I know, you will find that it says explicitly that he didn't finish the conquest. On the contrary, when he was very, very old, it said he still hadn't finished the conquest. And King David, hundreds of years later, is still finishing the conquest of Jerusalem. So what are they talking about? What are they writing about? They're writing about a mirage. Also, how many times I've been told, the Jews didn't build the pyramids. Why do you think the Jews built the pyramids? But the Torah says they built storage cities, not the pyramids. That's the pyramids at all. Mm-hmm. So you find this kind of absolute, abysmal ignorance. I can give you 100 examples. So you have to realize that in terms of not taking it seriously, or reading it in such a way as to create false problems, so as to create false conclusions, there's a whole industry of doing this, And that will destroy even the light that's in it to have an effect on the person. But as I told you, I realize now that the Kiddush is fairly limited because it's Hasmada. He dedicates himself to it. And he's not frivolous about it. He doesn't think it's an important study, any more important than chemistry, but he's honest about it, then it could have an effect on him. Okay? All right. Okay, so now, what should one study? This he doesn't say here, he says it elsewhere. The Torah has many different branches. First of all, there's a difference between what's called Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebiksav, he designates the whole of the Tanakh, 5 books of Moses, prophets, and writings. And the Torah Shebal Peh is all the rest, which he indicates is a way of relating to and understanding what's the written part. Now, should one specialize? Should one generalize? Even within the realm of the study of Torah, there are different levels. There are commonly what are called Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat could be roughly, very roughly described as the literal, logical meaning of the text. And now Remez and Drush, I just happen to be learning the Gemara and Shir Shirim now, so they switch places sometimes. But let's take Drush first, which is the way people usually do it. Drush is going beyond just the literal meaning of the words. One friend put it to be this way. Pshat is, what do the words mean? And Drush is, why are these words used to mean that meaning? Because if you want to communicate that meaning, there may be several different ways of doing it. There may be a shorter way. There may be a way that's more precise. So you'd have to ask why the Torah chose this word to communicate that meaning, and that way you can get extra information out of it. Remez is things that the Torah hints at. For example, extra letters or position of words, order of subjects. And finally, Sod is the great secrets, which we would call Kabbalah, and the Ramchal would definitely call Kabbalah, which underlie all of them. Listen carefully. It's not a separate study. Not like one is chemistry, and one is Chinese history, and one is differential equations, and one is astronomy. No, one of them underlies all the other three, suffuses all the other three with extra content, extra information. That's what Sod does. What about that? Should one specialize in one of them, or should one try to appreciate all of them? So there are, I think, 3 principles here. Maybe there are 17. I'm missing out on some of them, but 3 that I think apply. First of all, it depends upon how old you are. Start, according to the Talmud, you should start with the things that you learned that will help you perform correctly. Because although learning is not just for the sake of performance, but it is for the sake of performance. So really, one should start with the things that are applicable. Beyond that, there should be at least a touch, an acquaintance with the various different levels. Here, the Greeks have a very wise, I think, motto, which is taken over by certain Mefarshim, and that is you should know everything about something and something about everything. Something about everything, you should have widespread acquaintance with lots and lots of different topics. There's one source that says that any sefer, any Jewish book that you opened in your lifetime to learn something from, after your life is over, you'll have a relationship with that book in the world to come, and you'll be able to absorb from the material that's in that book. But a sefer you never opened, you never took a look in, you won't have any connection with that. When I heard that, I learned the Daf Yomi, which is the Babylonian Talmud. I thought, well, what about the Jerusalem Talmud? So for a certain period of time, I learned the Jerusalem tractate together with the Babylonian tractate. You learn them side by side and see how they relate. Okay, I've learned a few tractates in the Yerushalmi. So at least that'll be open to me. You should know something about everything. But also you should specialize, because only if you master some topic do you know what mastery means. Only if you master a topic do you have any appreciation of how deep a topic of Torah is. And that will enable you to know what you're missing in all the other topics. That's very, very valuable. It creates humility. It creates a realistic sense of your limitations. It leads you then to know you must ask questions. You should really ask questions to the one you specialize in also, who said you've really mastered it. But you should, in that way, you have that to balance off. Fine. Those are general principles. Ramchal adds another principle. Because various sources in Kabbalah tell us that the end of times of this period of history will be ushered in by the study of Kabbalah. He says that if you get to a certain point where you have done the other things, you know something about everything about something, and you've learned the practical things first, then you should devote your time to Kabbalah. That's really what you should devote your time to. That would be learning for the sake of the tikkun of the world to bring the world to its perfection. That's a very high thing to do. Even when you do it a little bit while you're in the first stages, if you do it a little bit, that has that effect. But it's something that you can only get to really productively when you know the rest, because those who wrote Sod, those who wrote that highest level, knew all the other levels. So they were taking all of the other levels for granted. I have seen many attempts to translate books from this area into English and to communicate them to beginners and so forth and so on by people who are enamored of Jerusalem Aramaic and enamored of mysterious ideas, and they make terrible errors, because they don't know the rest. And if they had known the rest, they'd say, well, if this is true, one person many years ago told me that non-Jews are animals. When I balked at it, he said, listen, I understand you. You spend most of your day with non-Jews, so you get to like them and you get to interact with them, but you could like a dog also. So non-Jews are animals. I said to him, really? Let's see now. Do dogs go to Olam Haba? Gee, but it seems to me non-Jews go to Olam Haba. And do dogs have mitzvos? No, but non-Jews have mitzvos. And non-Jew could convert to become a Jew. Can a dog convert to become a Jew? No. So aren't there certain important differences here, that you're leaving out? Now he read a certain book, and that book says that a non-Jew has a nefesh bahamis, not a nefesh elokis. Okay, fine. I mean, the book is Kodesh Kodashim, and certainly that is true. But the author of the book knew those facts that I just told you, and he wasn't intending to contradict those facts. And if the facts contradict your understanding, then you're not understanding what he said. So you have to be reasonably quite knowledgeable in the other areas before you start learning Sod. But then, according to Ramchal, the Sod becomes the now. To finish what I promised before. So this highest energy is something which can affect the world as a whole. That's why you should have an acquaintance with the Torah as a whole, because this is something which has a branch in every aspect of reality. And you should have a hand in using the energy which is inherently universal. That, I think, is what we could say about this highest energy. It has a universality which other mitzvahs don't. Each mitzvah is dedicated to a very particular narrow piece of reality and has an effect to be misaking that, but you should also have an interaction with that energy which works on the whole. Now, somebody's question, is your hand up? No. Somebody's hand was up? No, I thought somebody. Yes, back.
I mean, I've just been bothered, like the emphasis, I feel like, about Torah learning is so, like, central, and, like, you know, all your free time you're supposed to spend learning.
Yeah.
And I've heard that, like, the purpose of the world is just, so, like, if Jews would be learning all day, that would be, like, the ultimate achievement and purpose. Just, like, but isn't learning, it's, like, learning about what to do. It seems like, the learning, why is that the main point? And also, like, most of our learning is like speculation upon speculation upon speculation. Like, what did Rashi think? And Rashi's thinking about what did the Gemara think. The Gemara's trying to figure out what the Mishnah thought. So it's all like doubt upon doubt upon doubt.
Okay. This is a whole long list, and it's a prepared list. I see that. Okay, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. You can say the same thing about astronomy and physics, and it's not true. You get more certainty when you put the pieces together, not less. It's not doubt upon doubt upon doubt, because the more information you have, the less room there is to wiggle. It's a mistake in logic. It's just a mistake in logic. But on the first thing that you said, I don't know where you're coming from. The rule with Torah is that you have to stop learning Torah to do any mitzvah that it can't be done by somebody else. So you have to put on tefillin, you have to bench, you have to eat matzah, you have learning the Torah all day long? Certainly not. Certainly not. Where'd you get such an idea?
Well, I know all your free time.
That's not the same as just learning Torah all day, because you use all your free time. The rule is any mitzvah that can't be done by somebody else, you have to stop learning to do. If you're a parent, you have responsibilities to your children, you have responsibilities to your wife. Certainly not true that the ideal is to learn. Wait, say, childless people are on a higher madrega than people who have children because they have more time to learn. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's just not correct. Not correct. If I have to understand what the Tana said and what the Amora said about the Tana and what the Rishon said about the Amora, right? I have three different statements that have to be understood. Any suggestion that I have is to make all three statements true. That's much more certain than just speculating about what the Tana said. I have more information. The more information you have, the more constriction there is on the hypotheses that you can float. It's not doubt upon doubt upon doubt. On the contrary, more information means we have less wiggle room. Just a mistake in logic. Okay.